Hey guys, I'm really excited. I'm doing one of the first. Well, I've actually done another book interview before with Jared Taylor and his book he wrote on Japan. So I guess this is our second one. I have this. It's so exciting to be able to interview the author. And as part of Gumroad, we do a book club every month where we review a book and discuss it. And it's super exciting when we can get the author on. And I am so happy to have Leslie Ghiglieri. Did I get your name right? I always struggle with that.
No, it's perfect.
All right, Leslie, thank you. And she wrote this book we're going to be talking about, The Decision to Kill, and the subtitle, A True Crime Story of a Teenage Killer and the Mother Who Loved Him. And Leslie, thank you so much for joining. I really am honored that you would join us. And as a reminder, if you're a Gumroad subscriber, this Friday night, she's going to join our Gumroad so you can ask her questions. So if you're not part of Gumroad, it's a good reason to subscribe. And just an overview of the book. This is about a murder that happened, I believe, in 1986, where a teenage boy killed his adopted father. And it really wasn't like a whodunit type of story because it was, I think, pretty obvious from the get-go he did it. But it really was a little bit of the motivations behind the whole murder. And Leslie, if I read your forward correctly, you happened to you met his parents before, well, obviously before he killed his father, but his parents were Sheree, I believe. Is it
Sheree.
Sheree Weir is how you pronounce it,
Yes.
and Don Weir. And then I believe at a church you met Sheree and Don really just months before the murder. Is that correct?
Right. It was about probably about 8-9 months before we went to a banquet around Thanksgiving. It was a
Mhm.
couples banquet, and we were seated with Don and Sheree. And then it was in that following October that the murder took place.
Yeah, that had to be shocking. And then over the years, you became friends with Sheree, and she wanted to relate the story to you. And you said in your book you always wanted to write. What is this your first book that you wrote?
Yes.
Okay, and it was pretty much interviewing her. You went through the letters, the police reports, and it's really fascinating going back in the time because this took place in 1986. So the guy that did this was named Dwayne, and he'd be a little bit younger than me. He's dead now, but I understand the time, and I'm just going to ask you right off the bat because this is the $69,000 question. Why do you think he shot his father?
I think he just had in mind what he wanted to do with his life and saw his dad as an obstacle to that. And he, in his mind, however he construed it, just figured if he got rid of his dad, he could live his life his own way.
Yeah, and he didn't really put much thought into the crime. Is if you read the book, it seemed more. I mean, he did plan it. It was first degree murder, but he didn't really. Okay, what do I do after the crime? How do I do this? And so, and he confessed right away to some people, and so he was caught within, I believe, the next day. An interesting aspect of this is he was adopted, and he always had issues even since a kid. And this really gets into sort of the nature nurture argument. Were you able to track down his biological parents, and did they have issues?
At first, when they adopted him, they only got the very sparse information that she was 16 and he was 18, and they had met at a car race, excuse me, at the car races. It was a short term relationship. And there was nothing much more than that. Later on, when Dwayne was in prison, he had expressed a desire to kind of find out about his biological parents
Mhm.
and had asked his mother through communication of letters if she would see what she could do to search that out. So there was some information that she acquired. She hired a PI at that time and did get some names and a little bit more background information. Nothing extremely revealing, but did find out a little bit more about his mother.
And did you find information about his mother and father? Did they have a criminal history, or were they just what was their situation?
They were both just young. Her upbringing had been very, um, she'd been through the foster system, and she just was kind of lost, as far as any groundings, and met this guy and didn't think twice about entering into whatever sort of relationship ended up with this boy and this pregnancy. So it was kind of sad. Um, she had some health issues that ended up being able to, you could tell later on in his life as he was
Mhm.
manifesting medical issues that it did transpire from the mother. It got passed down. It was genetic. Um, but right from the get-go, let's just say he didn't have the best situation.
Right. And I guess I should do background for you guys that are watching this. I highly recommend I get this book. And Leslie, it's on Amazon still, right? I think I
Yes.
saw it there. So if you guys get it, it's a great read. By the way, congratulations for being a good book. Where I like books where I can sit down and it keeps me enthralled. I think I read it in just a couple of settings because I really enjoyed it and I found it interesting. So I highly recommend you guys get the book. If you like true crime, it's really fascinating. It gets into the psychology of all this, which we're going to dig into here a little bit in this interview. And the setting was 1986 Oregon, right? And that was
Yes.
by the way, I've just been to Oregon a couple times, Portland and Fort Worth.
Oh.
I the area is beautiful there. It's just gorgeous there. So and it was just in case you guys don't know, it was Dwayne was white and his family, would you call like middle class type
Yes.
family? Yeah.
Yes.
So there's nothing like really weird about it or anything like that. And I believe they adopted because Sheree felt that she couldn't have a child. But then, in many cases, she later did get pregnant, and they had a daughter, Donnette, I believe it was.
Yes. Hmm.
And so they had two children there, and so that was kind of the family. But Dwayne, even from an early age, was getting into trouble. He wasn't getting along with the kids at school, and there's a attempt that he was trying to kill animals, I believe is one of those things, and kittens or something, drown them. And it's sort of an interesting view. And I want to ask you this, Leslie, because we're going to get into the whole what really is this a lot of times biological or is this the environment? We're going to get into this, but because Donnette, I understand, and I know she wants to keep private, but it seems like she turned out fairly normal, right?
I would say so. Yeah. Um, yeah, she did what she thought was expected of her. It was a hard place for her to be in, especially after the murder, because her mom continued to want a relationship with Dwayne, which perhaps we'll talk about a little more, but
Mhm.
that was hard for her. So there was a lot that she had to deal with besides finding her father dead at the time, and she was 10 years old. So that had to affect her for a lifetime.
Yeah, I imagine so. But I think what's interesting, so you have two kids, one that has major
Mhm.
problems and one that is somewhat normal. And so there's something else going on here. And Dwayne was biologically from a different family. And so it kind of gets into that a little bit. But also what's interesting, and we'll get into his drug use and the way he acted. But the thing, I was from that era and he wasn't the only kid. I can tell you that smoked some pot, drank some beer,
Mhm.
listened to like rock music. A lot of kids did back then.
Mhm.
What do you think? How did that? Was it he had something wrong with him biologically, and then all the drugs and alcohol and that sort of thing just triggered him into a place where other kids don't go? Because I grew up, a lot of kids were sneaking beer. They would have some pot. They would, it was just,
Mhm.
it wasn't abnormal. What do you think was unique about him? Was it just in his brain something was wrong or something else?
Boy, I would have to be able to write another book about all that. I mean, and answer that question. Is it a combination of things? As you found out in reading the book, that he was eventually diagnosed as a sociopath, and that explained a lot of his behavior. His mother had been frustrated because she knew she would. When I interviewed her, she said, "I just knew that I knew that I knew." That there was something else going on with him. And that's why I sought out counseling and tried to get him counseling, but no one had any answers. I don't think it's a lot better now. There's maybe more awareness about these things that are hidden. But I don't know that there's a lot of counselors out there uh, equipped to be able to pinpoint those problems in kids that don't really respond to other forms of help. With him, his personality, he was pretty kept to himself. Maybe part of that was because he had some health problems that kept him from really feeling like he fit in. And those health problems um, made him more inclined to keep to himself. I do think that his father, Don, really had the hopes of having what we consider a man's man kind of son. And he was hoping to do hunting and fishing and work on his truck and some of those things that um, didn't happen that well with Dwayne. He did do hunting and fishing, but he wasn't exactly excited about doing it. So he didn't really, that may have affected his relationship with his dad. I think Don loved him. I don't think that he shunned him because of that, but it wasn't really the relationship that Don, wanted, I don't think, with his son. And then maybe it wasn't, Don wasn't able to relate to Dwayne in the way that Dwayne needed. So I think some of that probably factored into the drug use. And from what I understood with his drug use, he was one of those kids that once he started taking marijuana or smoking marijuana, he didn't care what he took, whatever would make him feel high. So I kind of have a prejudice about, because of my law enforcement background too, about marijuana use and what it can lead to. Doesn't always, but what it can. And in Dwayne's case, it did, and it didn't help things. Let's just say that.
Uh, we're going to get some difficult areas here. I love this called juicy because I know you knew the parents and I didn't know them, and so I'm going to throw a little bit of suspicion here. Maybe it's just me. I don't know if Don was necessarily perfect though. What didn't he
Nope.
sneak beer to his kid? And this is a kid that he underage too. And you kind of touched on it, but it seemed like this was kind of happening more than maybe even Sheree knew. Did you get a sense of that?
Well, I didn't have a long-term relationship with them before the murder happened,
Right, you met
right?
him just once,
So,
yeah,
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 so I just relied on either interviews or things that
yeah,
Sheree told me afterwards. Um, Maybe in his defense, maybe Don, that was a way he thought, "Oh, I can, we'll take a beer together," and,
yeah, manly, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly, and he probably, it wasn't a big deal to Don, although there's kind of some indication maybe Don drank more than was best for him. Um, at least some of the things that I found out later that I didn't include in the book, but sort of alluded to, that, I mean, he definitely drank. And
yes,
so I think that was his part of his attempt to connect with his son. Because what surprised me was to find out that Dwayne openly smoked. And I don't think, even though kids, like, I'm your vintage too, and kids smoked, I don't think many parents encouraged it or welcomed it or maybe even allowed it in the home environment. And it seems like they did. Like it was okay for Dwayne to smoke or to drink, but the drugs was a whole different matter.
Yeah, and that was very interesting because they seem to be a very, would you say fundamentalist Christian type family too?
I would say that. Yeah, I would say that.
You would expect more permissive, like ex-hippie family. Oh, I don't care if you drink or whatever you do, we're just cool. But they seemed uh, kind of on some levels uptight about their son. And it seemed like a little bit of mixed signals to me where you're saying, "Oh, marijuana is horrible, but here, kid, have some beer underage." And I'm not defending marijuana, but I'm
Right.
sure you in law enforcement, you've seen how alcohol can destroy people too.
Yes. Yes.
And it's and uh, yeah, I know some cases of someone that killed someone. I won't get into the details who, it's a private matter, but they were drunk and they shot someone close to them. So it happens. Liquor is not a good thing to give someone underage, especially if you think they're having other issues. So I just wonder. And I'm not trying to defend Dwayne, but it's almost a little bit of mixed signals here.
Yes, I would say that's true, and it was hard when writing the book. I didn't want to make it a commentary about what I thought about what the parents did
Right.
or what Dwayne did or what they, because I just didn't want it to be that. I wanted people to be able to read it and say these parents made mistakes. How did that play into the ultimate situation? And just give them a chance to kind of be thoughtful about all the things. And it's not just one thing. It wasn't just marijuana use, and it wasn't just him being a sociopath. It was a combination of things that sort of created the situation.
Yeah, I see that. And I'm gonna get back to the parents a little bit more too, but I had another thought when I was reading the book, and you're gonna think horrible of me. You'll think horrible of me, and the audience will think horrible of me. But I kind of thought in some ways, but for the grace of God, this could be me and Dwayne. And what I mean by this is I wonder how close we really are because I've had angry thoughts that
Mhm.
I never enacted or did, right? I've never killed anyone. I've never made a major crime or even a minor crime. But I've had these dark thoughts. And I think back to Jesus said it, even if you have these dark thoughts, if you're like angry at someone, even if you don't kill them, in a sense, you've already have. And so that's why we need forgiveness and so forth. Or if you lust after a woman, even if you don't do it, it's still a sin. And I sometimes wonder how really different Dwayne was because it's easy, I think, as a person to read this book and say, "Oh, well, Dwayne is just a sociopath. He's just
Mhm.
just horrible monster." But when I read the book, don't get me wrong, I wasn't sympathetic with him, but almost in a way, I was like, "Well, how far, how easy it is to slide in that situation
Mhm.
where you could go into that darkness and." Because I think it's easier to kind of otherize them. I think they call it, meaning they're just totally different than us. There's nothing in common Dwayne has with us. But at least in my case, I think there's a lot of things that are common where
Mhm.
you get into these dark
Mhm.
places. I never acted on it. Did you
Mhm.
kind of get into that sense too with Dwayne? Not saying you justify what he did, but could understand to a degree.
Um, I would say so, and there really is kind of this line that we all have
Mhm.
shared emotions, um, anger, grief, all the things that we feel as people, and, um, what is the difference between there's something that prevents you and me from acting on it to that degree, and, but yeah, I think having those feelings is pretty common, especially if you're talking about the teenage years when
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
I
we're
mean,
all kinda crazy.
yeah, you're saying like, "Oh, he didn't relate to people, he felt isolated." Well, welcome to my life, right? I mean, I was in situations I had friends, but there was times I felt I think it's a teenage thing, right? It's like a stereotype. So,
Yeah.
you don't, my parents don't understand me. I mean, the whole
Right.
bit, that's just so common. It's just, I was interesting. And I think maybe the drugs, alcohol, all that kind of, I want to, what do you, I'll ask you, do you think if he wasn't on drugs and alcohol, would have he done these crimes still just because he's a sociopath? Or did that put him over that barrier?
Oh, I'm not sure how to answer that. It's possible, that that one thing that took away the last inhibition
Hmm.
that allowed him to justify in his own mind that that's what he wanted to do, and it made sense to him. I had a bunch of people review the book before, people they call kind of like influencers, people that are
Yeah.
I had and I remember a district attorney read the book and she said people try to make sense of a senseless crime. And, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, well, what made him do it, which I think is really interesting. I'm fascinated with all of that. So I
Right.
like talking about it. Um, what does that say about me? I'm not sure. But,
Well, I think that
you know,
says a lot of good things because I think it's too easy just to put people in a category, they're monsters. And
mhm.
I think there may be some, but to me, I didn't think Dwayne was necessarily a monster reading the book. He had a lot of issues. And I think it is important to try to understand. It doesn't mean justifying it or like he should get off, but I do think it's important to try to get kind of a perspective, really what happened here and how did all these steps fail? Like he went into therapy, but it didn't do any good, and so forth.
Right, and I'm sure those are the same questions that Sheree had. We tried to stop the drug use. We tried to stop this and that. We tried to restrict him. We tried to take him to mental health counseling and still the result was what it was. But I have to say in thinking a little further about your question is probably the fact that he didn't get involved in drugs to the point he was taking hallucinogens and kind of indiscriminately, it sounds like, taking whatever he could take. That certainly didn't help his state of mind in decision making.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Just like if you get drunk, I know myself. You get
Yeah.
drunk, your inhibition is lower, and you do some silly things you want to do sober. And I could see maybe that helped when he got into this dark place.
Mhm.
And I happen to think that maybe because they had this weird. Again, it was hard to me to figure this family. They seem like super religious. And by the way, did Sheree read the book? Was she alive when you? I
No,
know
it
she later
was
passed.
yeah, it was very sad to me because the book took me 5 years to do,
Hmm.
and, it was probably, 2 more years after she passed away before I finished it, and that was really sad to me.
Yeah, and that was it was it's interesting because how do you write a book and try to be objective, but you're friends with her and you don't want to show some bad things? Did you struggle with that?
Well, I pretty much relied so much on what she told me, and I think in a lot of ways she was, she was pretty open about a lot of things, pretty honest with herself and honest with me for the most part. Um, I think her end conclusion about why she wanted the book written, I think she felt that maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I think she felt that there was redemption on the part of Dwayne from a spiritual perspective. I think she was assured of that by the time he had passed away. And that's why she wanted the book written, I think, to encourage people that face similar things with their situations with their kids, especially as it involves drugs or whatever, alcohol or whatever, not to give up on their kids despite what they're seeing. But if you stay in it for the long haul and give them support without enabling their behavior, that the hope is that eventually there will be change.
Yeah, yeah, and There was some more interesting. What was? Do you think? It seemed like if I read between the lines, Sheree and Don, they had some issues in their marriage. I know you kind of hinted at, was it his intern or his secretary, that young girl? I mean,
Yeah.
let's face it. I don't know if you know, he had an affair with her. I know she tried to say, "Oh, yeah, I caught him with her on his lap," and I'm like, "Okay, honey, if that's what you think all this happened, I could tell you really what happened here." Maybe she doesn't want to understand that or didn't understand that, but
No, she never said the words adultery to me, but, there was certainly a lot to indicate that went on, and, yeah, it was like a mill, like, where they, dealt with mill products. Because up here in
yeah,
Oregon, it used to be a big timber,
right.
logging. There's a lot of reasons it's not so much anymore, but so it was kind of a spin-off mill that was run, and this gal worked there. I don't know what capacity exactly, but there was obvious age difference and there was obvious behavior that wasn't appropriate.
So I think there was probably issues in the home, even, and again, it's not trying to excuse Dwayne's behavior, but it was almost like you had on the surface this a perfect American family. They have their beautiful land and they go to the church, but meanwhile, Don's really having an affair. He's giving beer to Dwayne. And did Cherie ever regret how controlling she was over Dwayne? And I kind of, here's my thing, because I'm a parent of two kids and they turned out wonderful, but they both did the same thing. It was so funny. And I love them both. Are adults now, but they both, when they're in high school, they went through a phase, they smoked cigarettes. And my attitude was like, well, it's your can. If you get cancer, I guess that's on you. I'm not going to worry about it. And then they both quit. Sometimes I
Mhm.
think that if you push too hard, you can have the opposite effect. And I think there was a time like she was listening in to Dwayne's conversations or something
Mhm.
like that.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if maybe if they just kind of chilled about some things, like, okay, if you want to have your stupid music, whatever. I mean, if you want to, I mean, because he's already
Mhm.
16, at some
Mhm.
point you got to give them some rope that you pray for them, you wish them the best, but there's only so much you can do when there's actually they start to it just escalates the situation. And I think in Dwayne's mind, it's not an excuse, but he felt trapped. Like they kept doing harder and harder punishments on him. And then finally, I think what sparked it, he was in like this garage band, which everyone was in back in those days,
Mhm.
and so they took away his music, and that's what he really loved. They took away his instruments. And did she ever regret that maybe she should have just backed off a little bit with trying to control his behavior at that age?
That's a really interesting question, and no, she never said that, and I don't know if anybody proposed that concept to her. Um, I think she acted like, well, I do a little bit, with my kids when they were younger, and just being fearful of seeing your kids going down the wrong path. And what can you do to change that? How can you help them see they're doing the wrong thing? And instead of maybe having an approach like you did, where you were a little bit more, well, you're this age, you're making your decisions. Not that you don't care, but that's, I don't think this is a good idea for you. It could end up in this and that, but I'm not going to follow you around and see if you have cigarettes in your pocket.
Right.
Although they did allow him to smoke, they did allow him to drink beer.
Yeah. And again,
So
that's what was so weird about the whole situation there, because they're big Christians and worried about everything. So,
they were frustrated. I think they were just trying things, or mostly she was. And like it depicted in the book, I think pretty true to life, that Dawn worked so many hours that was all left to her. And so she was the one making those decisions and, trying to take him to counseling. And, but the approach she was doing didn't work, but she didn't know what else to do.
right. Because when you're at 16, it's different than if you're 9. At that point, I mean, we have this concept of teenager, but it's kind of a new concept. You're kind of in some ways an adult. And I think it's kind of hard to push too much because, but it, was he ever planning to? Because he talked about he tried to run away, but they kept getting him, right? And so this is one of the reasons I believe he said he killed his father.
Yes. Yeah. I never got into a detailed um, conversation with Sheree about the other times he ran away. I don't know if they just went and got him at a friend's or if they got the police involved, if he was ever actually arrested as a runaway. I know he was arrested for shoplifting once, but I'm not sure about running away. Yeah, he over and over he did mention trapped, and even in the letters after he was in prison, he said he felt trapped.
Right. And I picked up on that. And then we
Mhm.
get in. So most of the time I would say like half the book, am I right? The first half kind of describes
Mhm.
leading up to the crime. And then the last
Mhm.
half really talks about him being in prison and his
Mhm.
relationship with his adopted mother, Sheree, and a little bit with his sister, adopted sister. But he went in, he was like, again, he was very naive. He almost had this
Mhm.
attitude of, oh, okay, well, I agree. I kind of did a bad thing. Maybe I need to stay at home for a little bit. He didn't understand almost the serious nature of like, no, you can spend your life in prison. Uh, i- is that the sense that you got from this too?
Yes, and I have a friend that spent most of her professional life as a probation officer dealing with the more serious juvenile offenders, and she said it's not uncommon that juvenile offenders don't seem to understand the finality of murder. And you think, well, like that just doesn't make sense to you and I. Why would you not understand that? But she said it's really not uncommon. Like all of a sudden, it's not like they expect the parent to show up to visit them or anything, but they just don't grasp the seriousness of what they've done and how that's affected everyone forever, including them.
And a lot of these people, not just Dwayne, but I see with they have a trouble of they almost see themselves as a victim too.
Mhm.
That this is some outside force that happened, and see old joke of the guy that kills his parents and the pleas for mercy to the judge because he's an orphan. But there's some truth to that. It's like, well,
Mhm.
I'm a
Mhm.
victim here too. This
Mhm.
terrible thing happened. Like it was this outside force that came down on him, and he did it. And that was another interesting aspect getting into the spiritual realm.
Mhm.
Uh, did she believe, or maybe you, or was he influenced by like demons and stuff like that?
It's really hard to know certain things, and I appreciate your program so much. That's why I enjoy watching you, but because I'm like-minded in so many ways. But when they talk about hate crimes, it's to me, I just think murder is a hate crime. Like
Right. Yeah. It
I
is
never have
definitely.
quite understood that concept,
Yeah.
but so you just think, how can there's something wrong with anybody that commits murder, right? Like um, I mean, yes, you can
Yeah,
call
there's different, I would say, categories of murder.
true,
Why you
yes,
murder. There are sometimes from a brutal logical reason and sometimes logical reason to murder. I'm not advocating it, by the way, but I'm just saying, like the old dead man tell no tales, that type of thing. Like, oh well, if we kill these people, they can't testify on
hmm
against us.
hmm
But then there's just some weird random killings that just don't make any sense.
yeah,
And so there's kind of it's those ones that don't really make a lot of sense. And I would sort of put this killing in that category because obviously he didn't think this through. What was he planning to run to Canada? I believe he had
hmm
like a girlfriend up there,
hmm
so he's thinking you shoot his dad and somehow get to Canada, and then
hmm
but that fell apart real quick. So it wasn't really planned out that well.
No, no, and what's a little interesting, it was probably a couple months ago I got this message sent to me on Messenger, and it ended up, I thought it was maybe some random person, but it ended up being the actual girl from years ago when he went to the World's Fair and met this girl up there. And this was the girl that he decided that he was going to join up with after he had killed Don, which, like, he never did go up there. But she messaged me, and I never even had her name. And she messaged me. She'd read the book, and it was really interesting to hear her side of things. And she said there was never any romantic. She just said that she felt like she was a good friend to him, and he needed that, and maybe that's why he attached romantic feelings to it. But she said it tormented her. She was afraid of him for years, afraid he'd get out and then decide to come up and try to find her. It was really surprising to me and very sad. So did I answer your question?
Yeah. And the other thing you brought up another good point that I wanted to bring up is a lot of this was, and again, I think you see a lot of convicts do this. It's hard because he was eligible for parole. He, just as a spoiler, he never was paroled because he died beforehand. He probably would have been paroled by now, don't you think, if he lived?
Maybe. I was reading about, and I had some notes I'd written down because I thought I might bring it up, but we had a boy, he was 15, and he did this horrible series of murders in Oregon about 6 years after Dwayne, and his name was Kip Kinkle. Anyway, there was the legislature in Oregon changed the laws. Measure 11 made it a lot tougher on crime, a lot more serious penalties. There were mandatory sentences for violent crimes, and that include for juveniles, because they were seeing a growth in juvenile crime. And that's just been a interesting contention about, okay, well, we don't want to excuse juveniles for what they've done, but should they be held to the same standard? Are they as capable of making a decision to do something like this? Are they of not so much sound mind, but is the immaturity of their development partially responsible? And does that mean that at 15, you can or should put somebody in prison for life? And I think that's kind of changed. And I think argument can be made for all kinds of positions on that.
Yeah, and part of the whole parole thing, because he always wanted to be paroled, and his whole, I would say, half of the book was his thinking. And I think what was sort of frustrating, at least I imagine Sheree was frustrated as a reader. I was like, oh boy, this guy's just, he could parrot what he thinks he needs to say. And like, oh no, I take responsibility. I did a horrible thing. And then there's a lot of questions. Well, was his religious faith, was it real, or was a prisoner's religious faith before they go to the parole board? Because he befriended a pastor. And so there was a lot of, controversy, at least in my mind. Was he really changed, or was he trying to manipulate the situation to say what he needs to say to get out? Did you get a sense, I didn't think he would be a danger if he was released anymore, but maybe I misread it. Did you get that sense that he was changed at the end? I know Sheree did, but did you get that sense from your looking at it?
Well, I read, I read the 350 letters 3 times, and I did see a definite trend in his letters, how he did change over that time period. What made Sheree convinced her was more what she saw in him when she would visit. She said, in her own mind, you can say whatever you want about what you think or believe and how sorry you are, but to see a change in him, and that only came with her visiting him. She was able to witness really his countenance, she felt changed. And as a Christian, I mean, you know that that's possible. A person can be changed, but you also know that a lot of people use that just to manipulate others. So to try to discern that it's very difficult. And I think when she would have people, when she went to visit and she was visiting regularly, she saw other parents of other prisoners would come up to her knowing she was Dwayne's mother and talk to her about Dwayne and how he had helped their son in some circumstance or with legal matters or whatever. And she just felt like it was real. She wasn't sure. She was very, very, she had never been afraid of Dwayne, even in the angry moments when, she'd be upset with him as a teenager and he'd be doing drugs. She never thought he was violent. There was never, well, the kitten thing, maybe that was a bad indication, but in his teenage years, she never thought that. So when this happened, they didn't think when Don was murdered, they didn't think it was Dwayne, because he never appeared violent. So that to say she kept a relationship with him just because she was his mother and did love him as a mother loves their child, but didn't trust him, was angry, had all those feelings, that she had because of what he had done. So I think she wasn't easily duped. And I've had some people that have read the book say, oh, he was just manipulating her from the beginning and she should have just walked away from him and lived her life. Well, it's kind of easy to make that decision about somebody else's life and from the outside. And I just have excerpts of some letters, right? And so she read every one and she visited him and she had a lot more exposure to see if what he was saying and what he was doing were really the same. So I know she believed it. And there's a lot to indicate from reading the letters. He was very insightful. I think you probably picked up on that with how he was explaining himself.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found interesting with him, I don't think he was a stupid guy, but he was very easily swayed, and we'll talk about this, on his religion. He was like
Yes.
he was like a Pentecostal or evangelical, then he went Catholic, then he went I don't know what all. And then the big thing is he went through a phase where he was, I think, gay, then he became transgender, then he quit that. So it was like he was kind of all over the map in many ways. And I think that kind of fit into his psychological makeup of what he was. And and getting back to Don or Sheree, it was interesting. He killed Don, not Sheree.
Yes.
He could have waited and killed them both, but he killed Don. Did Don hit him and beat him? That was his claim. And I'm wondering, there was an instance where Sheree even admit Don did hit him. And I was wondering if there was more to that than we know. Did you suspect that? I mean, and I hate to, well, they're all dead now, but speak ill of the dead, they're all dead. But did Don, may he abused his son more than we know?
The only extra information I had was I talked to Donette about that. And I said, did you see anything where you would have thought your dad was being excessive with him? And she said no. So I think I think she would have told me the truth. I mean, she could have said, well, yes, this and that, but don't put it in the book. And I would have respected that and just not put it in the book. But she said no. So I'm sure he got very angry. I'm sure he was frustrated, just like I indicated in the story. But there's nothing really. I don't think that Don was a angry, um, abusive, brutal kind of guy. You know, his anger directed at Dwayne was frustration. And why don't you do what? Why don't you just do what we want you to do? Why don't you not do these other things? You know, why don't you talk well to your mother? You know, just his frustration. So that's just my guess.
Yeah. I just didn't know. I just didn't really understand because to me there seemed to be some other dynamic in their marriage that I think you gave an undercurrent and we just don't know because we're not there. But I
Mhm.
don't think everything was peachy keen. I think there were some issues like his I don't think Sheree ever came to terms he had an affair. I know he did, but she
Mhm.
never came to terms with that. And then, you know, the whole, it just, you know, yeah, he worked late. Hmm. So it's maybe I'm cynical, but uh, uh, yeah, so yeah, there is some things there that and again, I don't, but I mean, this is common. This is family dynamics. Every family has stuff like this.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that's what caused it with Dwayne, but in my if I had to do it, this is Ramsey Paul. My theory. I think I'm a big when I was in college, big nature versus nurture. Everyone's born a blank
Mhm.
state slate. It's
Mhm.
your environment. As I
Mhm.
get older, I'm getting less and less that. I
Yeah.
think it does have some input, but I think some of it's just straight genetics. I've known so many
Mhm.
people that have had. If you have a parent that is criminal or irresponsible, that the
Mhm.
kid tends to be, and I'm not 100%. And I
Mhm.
know Don wasn't his like real parent or his biological parent, but there was some. I mean, Don. Getting back to Don, am I forgetting this? Didn't he have a trouble with the law way back too?
He did. He
Yeah,
did.
yeah. See, so I'm just developing this whole case here with this relationship between Don and Sheree. So that's kind of an interesting one, and you have to look at it because you're getting this from Sheree's point of view. So, yeah. And did she ever remarry?
No.
Oh, okay. And did she ever get over it?
Um, well, that's, the get over it and closure thing, as much as you could. And
Yeah,
enough time did go by, um, that she kind of got used to what was versus what she had hoped from her marriage. Yeah, and I do think that she might have kept information from me about Dawn, because she wanted it to be about Dwayne and her, and so she may have thought, "This isn't important," it's about kind of what about there was a murder, and this is what happened after. So I may not have gotten the whole story from her. But
and I
it's real interesting with her. I have somewhere around here, I have her photo albums, all these photo albums, and you wouldn't recognize her because she went up and down in her weight,
yeah.
and that did factor in. I didn't want to make a big deal about that, but that did factor in. Some pictures she looks slim and beautiful, and others she doesn't, and so I'm sure that affected the marriage. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
truth of it.
Yeah, it is, and, then the whole therapy angle, and I'm gonna get into some trouble here, but I don't care. I'm just becoming very skeptical of therapy in general. I don't does it really work? Because it seems like you either do or you don't. I mean, you either change or you don't. Like
Mhm,
Alcoholics Anonymous, it has a huge failure rate, and people I've known that have made a change. I have someone close to me that used to be, well, is an alcoholic, if whatever how you want to define that, but he quit by just quitting, and that was
mhm,
it. And it
mhm,
seems like a lot of people they get into the therapy industry, they learn all the
mhm,
buzzwords,
mhm.
and I sometimes question how effective, even whether it's church therapy, whether it's the mainstream therapy. What's your opinion on the therapy, and does it really make a difference in a significant percentage, or is it? It didn't seem with Dwayne.
No, but it was clear from the beginning that he only went because Sheree insisted on it. So that doesn't set the stage for success.
Right. You can't force someone to change. Just
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
If you do that, yeah.
Yeah, even when she tried to tell him that I want you to go so that your dad and I can learn how to be better parents. He wasn't buying that. And I think general therapy, there are people that benefit. It's like everything, Paul. There are people that do benefit. You don't want to say no therapy is good. Some people just need someone to encourage them, be a friend, just listen to what's going on, maybe give them suggestions to have better outcomes in their life. But I mean, we're not talking about those people. We're talking about, people with serious problems. And he was a sociopath, and a sociopath, they're kind of set. I have this book here. I was going to recommend it to your readers if they're interested. Without
Sure.
Conscience. It's
Yeah.
awesome, by Robert Hare. He's a big guy in the sociopath criminology sector, but it was real interesting to me, because he says that sometimes around age 40, there tends to be a change with sociopaths. But before that, they're set. And even if you knew, if you knew that your kid, your 6-year-old, was a sociopath, you couldn't change them from not being a sociopath. It's not like they can give you medication. It's a behavior it's not a chemical thing. It's a behavior. So again, like you said, it's the biological, genetic, whatever that came down through his line somewhere. And what they say about, there's a chapter in there about what do parents do if they think they have, well, it's kind of like they can't do anything, but the only thing they can do, maybe if they're diagnosed, is to be aware of that. And if you're aware of it, then you understand certain things, like why you can't teach your kid to go, well, how would you feel if that happened to you? They don't care. And I was talking to one professional who said the trick, and this makes sense to me. I thought this was really cool. So all a sociopath does is thinks about themselves and how they see things. And so if you can convince a sociopath that changing their behavior is going to benefit them somehow, not because, oh, don't you see you're hurting this person by doing that? They don't care.
Right.
So, but if you see that, if you can convince them that somehow by them changing their behavior, they can benefit themselves, then maybe you can have some kind of plane to talk to them and get through to them about making a change. But it's I don't know, therapy, I think it has its place. What I wanted to mention too, have you seen, and I haven't seen it yet, but that movie Nefarious?
No.
Have you heard of it?
No. What's it about?
I haven't seen it, so I can just tell you kind of what I know, but I never watched Silence of the Lambs, but basically it's about a guy that's a serial killer in prison, and it factors into the spiritual, the demonic side of things. And I talked to a pastor that saw it, and he highly recommended it. And it's a fairly new movie, I think. But I just think that so many things factor in to someone's behavior. And I know there's books and studies about kids that came from adoption and how there's things that we don't understand, that they feel this abandonment that they don't really, they can't put words to themselves. They just know they don't feel like they belong, but they don't know why. And it's not because somebody told them they were adopted. I don't know if it's because when they're inter-utero, they are used to their mother's voice and for 9 months or whenever they start being able to hear, and then suddenly there's no mother anymore. I don't know, but there's things that they're finding out, that kids that are adopted out have problems and challenges that normal babies don't have.
Yeah, it reminds me of my grandmother. She was old. I mean, she's dead for a long time, but she goes, "Oh, that's the trouble with adoption. You just don't know what blood they have in them." And it sounded
Mhm.
so primitive, her saying that,
Yeah.
but there is some truth in that as we look back. There can be some issues there. And he was adopted as a baby? Is that correct?
He was 3 weeks old.
Okay. Did he know he was adopted from the beginning?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
And then what was his Donette, his sister was like 5 years younger?
yes.
And were they ever close or no? Never.
Well, there was enough difference in age, not so much.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, they would bicker, but, you know, when she was a newborn baby, you know, he was kind of disillusioned with what
jealous,
having
whatever.
this
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, all of that, and me looking from the outside in, okay, they always wanted to have a child. They couldn't, you know, I think it'd
Right.
been about 13 years from the time they were married till she had Donette, thinking that would never, ever happen. And it's hard not to imagine that there wasn't favoritism.
Yeah.
And a child, even in a normal, a two-parent, child family can feel jealousy because the baby gets
Mhm.
so much more attention. So I, in my own mind, because I was trying to make sense of everything that happened, I thought, you know, that could have been a deal too. You know, I'm sure they were excited. Oh, Donette. And then
Right.
Sheree was buying dresses. And I don't know, you know, all of that piled up just
The whole, transgender thing, that
mm,
does seem to be a prison thing, though. He never really seemed to I know later he tried to, retcon it like he always had these feelings, but I don't know, that seemed real suspicious to me, that whole thing. What's your take on that?
well, I would agree with you, and I remember when Sheree and I talked about it at first, and I said to her, "Well, you know, I was thinking just the prison environment," and she said, oh no," she said she had talked with Dwayne about it, and it didn't have anything to do with that, and it's just something he felt, and he'd always felt that way from the time he was younger. So I don't know. That I I don't know. He said he struggled with it. I don't know. Did he think by being gay in prison? Because when he was growing up, he had girlfriends. There was never any indication. He
Right, he
never.
seemed to have no troubles with
Yeah,
women at
yeah,
all. So, he always had and I thought he was romantic with a Canadian girl. I didn't realize that was at least she's saying that never happened. Or
yeah,
maybe she
yeah,
wants it to be that way, who knows? I don't wanna be
yeah,
associated with him, but, yeah, well, he's the type of guy that, like, the girls would I mean, troublemaker, bad boy guys always got a lot of girls back then, so I could see that, especially if they have dope on them. So
yeah.
yeah, yeah, so I could definitely see that. All right, well, we're gonna wrap up here soon, but I just wanna ask you, what's your overall, uh, takeaway on this book? And then I wanna ask, are you planning a future, book? And I think your love is true crime. Are you gonna stay in that genre, or are you gonna do something else?
Well, let's see. What was the first question again?
Well, what's your overall, takeaway from when you wrote the book? What did
Okay.
you what was your lesson or something that you really learned from this? I'll tell you what mine was, and like I said earlier, it was like, wow, I don't know if Dwayne was that much different than a lot of us. It's just he somehow went over that edge, and what brings you over the edge? What did you kind of get out of this?
Well, what I got out of it was initially my motivation, as you know from what I said in the intro, was to do this for Cherie,
Yes,
and
yeah.
yeah, so that was my motivation. But as I got into it, I was intrigued just by the process and what took place and the people and the more the psychological end of it. And so I just kind of enjoyed watching the change. Somebody said in a review that it was more of a family saga. And I think that's true because in a true crime, it's kind of there's this crime and there's this person and these are the family and you know, but this is it's so much more in depth. And I was going to tell you, Dr. Sasser, who's a retired psychiatrist. He did a review and he said, "Can a purely evil heart change? Can a broken heart forgive?" And then he went on to say that it was a thought-provoking read because I chronicled the changes in a self-absorbed psychopath and his mother. So I think I just really, that whole psychological thing about what was going on with him, what was going on with her, what factors fed into it, and just how she changed over time. I really enjoyed the process of that and the unfolding of the story. So that, yeah, I enjoyed it very much. But like I said, it took me 5 years. I had no idea that it would take me so long.
Yeah, it's very detailed and it's excellent. And what do you have any books planned in the future?
I would like to. I have a couple I would like to do. Have you heard of Edmund Kemper? Are you familiar with him? He's a serial killer in California. He was called the Co-ed Killer
Oh,
about
yes.
1973. Big guy, giant
Yeah, well, that
guy.
was it. That guy, yeah, he was huge. Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember him. Yeah,
6'9". Well,
yeah.
he was a neighbor of mine.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I have a story about him. So I've kind of played with the idea.
That
So
is cool. So, I mean, did you meet him?
he was calling me on the phone.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you're still with us.
Thank
That's pretty
you.
scary. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
it is interesting, and I think there is sort of a fascination that why do you think people have a fascination with killers and serial killers?
It's so popular now. All these podcasts and crime shows on TV. It's
Yeah.
crazy. It's I don't know. It's like wanting to look at a wreck when you drive by it. You
Yeah.
just this sort of morbid curiosity, I think. I'm not really sure the psychology behind it.
The one I always found fascinating is because he existed on such a normal level was Ted Bundy, because that
Yeah.
guy would come across charming, just
Yes.
normal. He's not like weirdo like you think a lot of these people are, and it's like, wow, how did you do that? That is what was really creepy. Maybe because usually you just feel like you could detect him, but you couldn't him because he was actually a
Yeah.
charming man.
Yeah.
He was a very nice man, except for killing women. But other than that, he was a good guy. So
Yeah, yeah, that's and I think with those serial killers, they probably all share that personality. That's how they get to their victims, unless they're, attacking them in the dark of night behind, in some dark alley. But most of them seem to woo their victims into a place of vulnerability and then would take them off. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
because, like, Ted was just all the women would see him as non-threatening because he's very charming, he didn't look dangerous, and he used that to be able to get him. I don't getting back to finishing this up, I
mhm,
don't think, Dwayne would have ever been a serial killer. I just think he just got to a
mhm,
weird point and he
yeah.
went over the edge. Was that your take with him too?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I
Yeah.
don't know that it would have been good for him to be out, but I
Mm,
didn't see him like being, if he had gotten away, you know, had some sort of life. I don't know. I don't really think his motivation was just to murder people. I think his motivation in murdering his dad was to get away and
that
just,
that is true, but and here's the big but, it's kinda like a bear, once they kill a human, you gotta put
yeah,
them down because they cross
yeah,
an important line. And I've watched the serial killers being interviewed, and the first one is the hardest, and then it becomes easier
yeah,
for them. So once
yeah,
you do it, take a life, it becomes easier to get into that mode. Like, well, I solved my problem with my dad a certain
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Here's another problem. I'm with this woman. She's bugging me. I have another way.
Yeah,
I know how
that's
to solve
right.
this. So I think you can't, once you cross that line, I think it does something to you that makes you much more dangerous that you're likely to do that again. That's what all the serial killers said, like the first time it's very difficult, but
Yeah,
then it becomes like they don't really
yeah.
care.
And then
So
there's probably some charge that they get out of it that, oh, this was kind of I got
Right.
some sort of charge gratification out of it.
Yeah, you get like a God complex. You control
Yeah.
life and you're powerful. And because otherwise, a lot of these people in their lives aren't powerful, they're not
Mhm.
successful. So, this is a way they get some sort of power, especially over women. And this could have factored into Dwayne. This has gave him some
Mhm.
power over his dad, and which I think his dad may have beat him some. So, this is his way to get back, and I have power over him. So, anyway, excellent book, guys. Check it out. It's called The Decision to Kill, true crime story of a teenage killer and the mother who loved him. And again, it's an easy read, and I mean that in a good way because
Mhm.
I like to sit down and just read. You're a good writer. I
Thank
was
you.
never bored. That's always a that's always a thing I do. If I get bored with a book, I'm like, oh gosh, as someone tried to get me to read. Did you ever read James Joyce like Ulysses?
No.
Oh, good.
No.
I just wanted to kill him, and he's dead. All right. Speaking of
Yeah.
kill, this could have drove me to kill because this guy is so pretentious. Oh, the greatest author ever. I'm like, no, he isn't. He did a whole chapter like, oh, I'm just so Archie. I'm not using any
Oh.
punctuation. I'm like,
Oh.
no, you're not Archie. This sucks. So anyway, don't get me on my James Joyce thing. The greatest author ever. I'm like, yeah, right.
Oh.
So you use punctuation, you can and words that I understand. So it was a good book. Guys, check it out. Thank you so much. It's so great to have actually the
Oh.
author on. And guys, remember we're gonna do a question and answer on Friday night. I'm so excited about that. And Leslie, thank you for joining. I really do appreciate this. We wanted to do this sooner, but I had some
Oh.
issues unfortunately come up in my life. My dad got sick. I had to go see him. He passed away. But it's great we finally got you on here.
Yeah, thank you so much, and, my condolences again about your dad. It's never
Well,
easy.
yeah, the only good thing about it is he lived to be 88 years old,
Mhm.
and for most of those 88 years, he was perfect health,
Yeah.
and that's a pretty good
Yes.
deck hand to be dealt in your life. You can make
Yeah.
it to 88 and be active until the very end. He was pretty active and a good sound mind, so that was good. So, but it is sad. I mean, I knew him my whole life, so it's always sad to lose a dad. So,
Well,
um,
and you got to see him. That was perfect right there toward the end.
Yeah, I knew I needed to because
Mhm.
he was like the opposite of a drama queen, whatever you call
Mhm.
that. And so when he said, I don't think I have long, I'd like to see you, I knew he wasn't the same man,
Mhm.
right? So I knew I needed to see him. And he was a good spirit. So it wasn't like a
Yeah.
sad meeting. We really got
Yeah.
along, had a good time. So again, guys, check out this book. It's a lot of fun. Leslie, God bless for being on here. And I will
Thank you.
definitely if you write another book, I'm going to get your new book. So
Oh,
definitely
good.
do that.
Okay, that's a reason to get started.
Yeah, yeah, and hear this the serial killer that actually called you. That's going to be that'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
all right. Well, thank you, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, Paul.
And